And our next item is the public hearing for the Extenet distributed antenna system. Can we have the staff report, please?
Yes. Good evening, Commissioners. So there's 5 separate applications for 5 different locations. However, the staff report covers all of the locations, and all the findings are the same for each application, so they're being presented together this evening. So here are the site locations. They're all in the north part of the city between 67th and Ocean and between Hollis and the edge of the city. 2 of the sites on this map are in Oakland, so we won't be discussing those tonight. The rest of the 5 are in Emeryville, and we'll be going over those sites. So there's 5 DOS nodes, distributed antenna systems, on existing. They're proposed to be located on existing utility poles in the public right-of-way, and required findings are for conditional use permit and design review per our telecommunications ordinance. And per the Federal Communications Act of 1996, environmental considerations are governed by the FCC, not local jurisdictions. So Node 7, which is located near the corner of 67th and Hollis, UPDR 15-003 is the file number. This is an image showing the coverage for that node, what it's proposed to show. The outdoor coverage reaching the furthest, the indoor being the closest to the actual antenna location. It's probably a little bit hard to see on this screen, but over here on the left is a utility pole. It's showing the associated boxes and the antenna attached to it. In the middle is a close-up of the antennas for this node, and on the right is a front view of those antennas and boxes.
There's no indication of the wiring coming down into any cable system? Are they totally independent units that don't connect with any?
I believe they're connected to the power and fiber optic network. However, any technical questions, the applicant is here, okay, and I definitely defer to them for any of those technical questions.
It doesn't show it on this diagram.
Correct, yes.
So can I ask a question that you can defer to the applicant to,
sure,
if you want? But I'm trying, the elevation and the equipment configuration, the sort of the drawings on either end look, I'm trying to see how they're consistent with each other. They look inconsistent to me. I don't see the 3. There's like kind of 3 things shown on the pole, pretty close together on the equipment configuration, and I didn't see that on the elevation.
So would you like to?
We'll
or we
let
can
him
come back to that
explain during
afterwards.
his presentation. Okay. Sure. Yeah.
I'm happy to flip back through the presentation at the end to help facilitate that conversation. So this is the rendering here. On the left, you have existing. On the right, you have proposed. And there's a little highlight of where it's located, top to bottom. This is another view on the other street here on 67th. And once again, existing on the left, proposed on the right, and a zoom in of that proposed location on the right. And then from the opposite angle, the proposed one is over here. So the next slide is a zoom in of that, or an enlargement of that slide rather. The next node, node 9, file UPDR 15-004. This is the site coverage for that. And once again, perhaps a slightly confusing design that we'll discuss with the applicant after my presentation. So the existing and proposed location for this one here. There's a highlight showing the installation. Another view, existing and proposed. Proposed is on the right. And an enlarged picture of that. It's a little bit difficult to see because of the tree. And from the other side, facing west, existing proposed is on the right, and an enlargement of that. So the third node, node 11, UPDR 15-005, is located on 66th Street, proposed to be located on 66th Street, with the coverage. And the designs again. And here is the rendering view, highlighting the area with the new equipment. Looking down the street, and a zoom in of where the equipment is located, above the tree there. And the other side of node 11. So node 12, UPDR 15-006, proposed for 65th Street. This is in front of the vacant lot. This is right next to the metal building. So node 12, there's the coverage for that site. You'll see the design here is slightly different from the previous ones. Rendering, highlighting the location of the new equipment. On the right, the proposed location is shown, and an enlargement of that picture. And, oh, one more picture, sorry. And an enlargement from that angle there, facing east. Then lastly, node 17A, by the corner of Ocean and Hollis. UPDR 15-007, site coverage, and elevations. Renderings proposed is on the right, highlighted equipment area, another view from Hollis, zoomed in to show the location of the proposed equipment, and then from the other side, it's kind of behind that vegetation there as well. So for design review findings, the design of the project is consistent with the general plan. It's consistent with UDP 42, creating safe sidewalks, comfortable and accessible for pedestrians. None of the telecommunication facilities are located in the sidewalk area. Finding number 2, the design of the project conforms to the Emeryville design guidelines. It conforms to A-8 of the design guidelines that undergrounding utility boxes, et cetera, whenever possible, or making sure that they at least provide an unobstructed walkway and path, and this provides an unobstructed walkway. And thirdly, the project is of a high design quality that is compatible with and will not adversely affect the surrounding area. And the proposed equipment is to be painted brown to match existing utility pole to blend in as much as possible. For the conditional use permit findings, the proposed use is consistent with the general plan, PPG 12, adequate public facilities, utilities and infrastructure systems, providing safe, reliable, and adequate services. This is adding service coverage. UDP 42, sidewalks shall be safe, comfortable, and accessible for pedestrians. This does not impede pedestrians. Secondly, the characteristics and design of the proposed use are compatible with the neighborhood. So it will provide additional wireless service in the neighborhood and not adversely impact the surrounding area. Third, the proposed use is compatible with utilities and emergency response systems, and the proposed telecommunications equipment will not affect utilities or emergency response systems. Fourth, the proposed use contributes to the general well-being of the community, and the proposed telecommunication equipment at these locations will provide additional wireless coverage to the surrounding neighborhood. And lastly, the proposed use complies with the planning regulations, which it does. It complies with the telecommunications ordinance. So staff recommendation is for approval of all 5 UPDR applications. I'm happy to take questions. It sounds like the questions you have might be directed more at the applicant, and I will introduce them right now.
But
if you'd like.
You did say, or they did say, and I presume you agree, that if things are underground, that they would agree to remove them?
Yeah, it's in the conditions of approval.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Oh, where, can you point us to that condition? I didn't notice it.
I need to grab them.
The owners of the utilities.
Yeah.
Condition 4B3, possible undergrounding.
Yes, it's at the top of page 5 of the conditions of approval.
The project we recently saw, I think it was a study session for the multifamily on 65th. Is there any intention to underground the utilities there?
If that project moves forward, yes, that would be an intention, but it hasn't had an official application yet.
Well, I think we shouldn't be premature about necessarily assuming that, because for a very small project that has very short frontage like that, sometimes undergrounding utilities isn't really efficient, because what ends up happening is you might lose one pole, but then you have to put in 2 new poles on either side of that for the wires to go down underground and then go across and come back up again. So you have a little short section of where the utility is undergrounded, and you probably have a net gain of 1 pole. So in small areas like that, it's not always a good idea.
Could you put a condition in that they would agree to pay undergrounding if
Sure.
other people on the block do?
Sure. Or you could have them, contribute money to an future undergrounding fund or something like that, when you could do a more effective undergrounding of a whole area or a whole block.
Is Baker Metal on the horizon anytime?
Well, Baker Metal was approved by the Planning Commission a long time ago, and its entitlements are locked in now, because the 5 townhouses that are on Ocean Avenue that are almost finished construction were a part of the same use permit. So I don't know if the applicant is actually going to go forward with the Baker Metal building anytime soon or not.
And undergrounding wasn't part?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I don't think so, because their frontage on 65th Street is even shorter than the other parcel. It's only like, 50 feet or so, I think.
So are these known areas to be, these are known dead zones or weak coverage zones? That's why these are being proposed for these locations?
There is an existing propagation map that's included in the package, and I can open it up for view here as well. In terms of how much coverage is existing there, I'll defer that to the applicant as well.
And then you mentioned the FCC is I guess you hear everyone talking about smart meters and concerns about electromagnetic, waves. Do we have information from the FCC on these particular devices, or?
Well, the applicant was required to submit a report showing what their emissions were, and they're all underneath the regulated thresholds.
Yeah. Can I add to that? So the FCC does have standards for emissions from these and types of facilities. What we, though, are precluded under the Communications Act, the Telecommunications Act of 1996, from discussing the health effects or using that in our decision.
Hasn't stopped them in Berkeley.
Well, it has. But I also want to ask Sarah, so I just want to clarify, when you say that the FCC has jurisdiction over environmental concerns, you don't mean that these are exempt from CEQA, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
CEQA still applies. It's just that you can't analyze the application as to as you say, the health effects that are related to the emissions that are generated by these, as long as we have verification that they do comply with the FCC requirements. And I'll also note that your resolution, the staff report and the resolution, does include an analysis of CEQA, and part of the proposed resolution is that the project does comply with CEQA.
Thanks. Any other questions for staff? Thanks. Sure. We'll go ahead and invite the applicant up to give us a presentation.
Thank you, Sarah. Good evening. I'm Matt Yurgovich. I'm here on behalf of the applicant, Extenet Systems. Briefly, I just want to tell you a little bit about who Extenet is, what we're proposing, and how we chose these facilities. Extenet is a telephone corporation. We're an international company based in the Chicago area. We deploy small cells, mostly in the public right-of-way, on existing infrastructure like joint utility poles, light poles. Also, we deploy networks like this in large buildings like hospitals, large hotels, casinos. Extenet has their CPCN, their Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity, from the state of California, granted by the CPUC. Extenet's also a JPA member, a Joint Pole Association, with authority to place these facilities on the joint utility poles. This is a distributed antenna system, as was mentioned by staff. These are small cells co-located with other utilities. These utility poles have telephone and power on them. An appropriate location for updated telephone, which is really what we're proposing. These facilities provide wireless service to your cell phone. These miniature facilities are important for infill coverage that is otherwise interrupted in areas like this because of high demand and also interference from the bay. When you have large tower sites or macro facilities, it's difficult to propagate a consistent signal to the public as a result of interference from the bay and also the high demand in these areas. So with these focused small facilities, we're able to talk to your cell phone a lot better. There are three factors that we use in choosing these sites, basically. Number one, obviously providing adequate RF coverage, the radio frequency coverage to the community. Second, there are engineering factors that are involved in choosing these poles. We take into account General Order 95, which is a California Public Utilities Commission rule. It sets forth what constitutes adequate space for climbing zone, for example, on the pole. All the rules for placing these facilities on utility poles. Third, of course, we take into account planning considerations, aesthetics. We look at, are we putting this in front of somebody's window? Is there a view impact to what we're proposing? There's a federal standard set forth by the 1996 Telecommunications Act requiring us to use the least intrusive means to fill a gap in coverage. So those are the standards that we're held to. I'm happy to answer any questions, but maybe I can start by answering some of the questions you've already asked. Is that if that's permissible? Sure. Let's start with there was a question about the lines between the RRUs. I just want to point out this is a sample set of drawings that you should all have with the staff report. This one in particular is for, oh, excellent. This is for what we refer to as Node 7. It's across from 6655 Hollis. Oh, okay, perfect. So, so first, oh, look at that. All right. So first we have the A2 sheet. And the A2 sheet is the elevation sheet. Also, I wanted to call out that it has some slices, some aerial slices, particularly this detail down here at the bottom. As you can see, there's, and also in the call-outs at the top, we've called out that we're proposing a 3-inch conduit that provides coaxial cable from the remote radio units. Those are the RRUs. In this case, we're proposing 2 of them here, side by side. And the coaxial cable carries the telecommunications signal up to the antennas. It's a 3-inch conduit. It's called out running along this pole here. There's also a 1-inch conduit that carries power, basically down to the meter. There's a PG&E power meter that's established at the very bottom at about 8 feet high. If we flip
Where's the meter on the drawing here?
the meter is at the very bottom.
Is that on the left corner?
So right here, yeah. So what we have here is this is the existing pole, and this is what we're proposing.
And where does the power come down to the meter?
Let's see here.
I don't see any cables on the pole.
Well, there is power on the pole. In this case, we're proposing a secondary line and a drop line down to the...
Oh, but it doesn't show it on any of these drawings.
There is a secondary line that's proposed at 33 feet 7 inches here.
So it's mounted on top of the pole?
And then you can see here there's a power riser with a weatherhead that's also called out. And PG&E delivers the power and facilitates that portion. What I wanted to point out also is that it might be a little confusing flipping the page to the D1 sheet. These are really just attachment details. They specify how, from a generic perspective, how these brackets are attached. So, for example, we're not proposing 2 antennas here. If you look at our scope of work, we're actually just proposing 1 antenna. But this mounting bracket is more or less the same in each instance. It's the same type of, 4-foot long. I forget the exact specifications. It's the same type of mounting bracket. Similarly, for 2 of our nodes, the southernmost nodes, what we refer to, it might be labeled, as you can see, nodes 12 and 17. We're proposing 4 remote radio units. In this case, though, we're only proposing 2. But this is, again, a generic exhibit. The elevation sheet and the scope of work on the prior page is really the proposal, the site-specific proposal.
So then even if you have 1 proposed antenna, you still have this bracket that has room for a second one in the future?
That's correct.
In detail 14?
And yes, that's correct. And that raises another item that I wanted to highlight. I know some of you might be familiar with other of these types of facilities, maybe in other communities. As Mr. Moss has mentioned, we've worked specifically with him in the city of El Cerrito. And in El Cerrito, I think that you'll notice, Mr. Moss, that is a carrier deployment. The carrier owns those facilities, whereas in this case, Extenet owns these facilities. I hope that you notice that these facilities are much smaller. These are probably the smallest facilities, I think, that could or would be deployed in these situations. Also, I wanted to emphasize that Extenet is a neutral host. So ideally, we would welcome, to the extent that's possible or permitted by GEO 95 from an engineering perspective, we would facilitate additional carriers onto this network. Extenet, as a part of the DAS, is also installing fiber optic lines as a backhaul over to a hub that's up in Berkeley that has the master base station equipment. These remote radio units are basically just, remote radio units, remote to each site. So, yeah, I mean, the great thing about Extenet is Extenet's a neutral host that will facilitate other carriers as best possible.
So but these antennas that are proposed here in these 5 sites, would these only serve 1 carrier, or would they have the ability to serve multiple carriers?
These particular antennas would serve only Verizon. This is the carrier that would transmit their signal through Extenet's facilities here is Verizon in this case. there's been discussion of technology, and I believe the technology is being tested, might exist to have multiple carriers transmit through a single antenna. The possibility of swapping antennas to allow such a thing in the future definitely exists.
Is fiber optic cable underground now in these locations?
No. As a part of this deployment, Extenet is deploying fiber optic cable as well. In some areas where utilities have been undergrounded, we're proposing underground fiber. But in those cases where the utilities are aerial, we're proposing aerial fiber.
So you would be putting a fiber optic cable above ground on the same pole?
Correct, yes. And we have an
exhibit. It doesn't seem to
exhibit.
indicate how it comes down or where it's hung up on the pole.
Let's see here.
I'm looking at A2, but seems to be the only document.
We do actually have if you look on the A2 sheet, the proposed fiber we have called out is at 23 feet.
Yeah, I see it, but it only goes from the power source up to the radiation cell or whatever you call it, but it doesn't show where it connects to the fiber cable that's bringing the information in the first place.
If you look at let's see here, I think the reason is it's inside the communications
Right.
conduit.
But
and
does
that's
it go
called
up to
out.
the top to an aerial cable?
It does. There is as you can see, at 23 feet, there's proposed fiber that's called out in the communications zone. And then as you can see from this detail too, the fiber is called out as being in the 3-inch conduit as well.
Right, but I don't see where it goes up to the
Is it
place
running
where it's
from
transmitted from the next tower or something.
Is it running from pole to pole at a lower height? At the
We do
33
have it
foot
running from pole to pole. I can show you, there's an exhibit that's a part of the staff report that calls this out. And maybe Sarah, if you have it handy, you can, oh, it's in my master pile here. Oh, great, thank you.
So, do you mind if I?
No, go ahead.
So here's a larger exhibit of what we were just looking at.
Which page is this? For which particular?
I grabbed, this one is from Node 7, and it's page A2.
But from
From a different
which of the
node.
permits?
That would be
7.
UPDR
This one.
15-003.
15-003, okay.
Yep, absolutely.
They do have that version.
So if you look at this one, where I just circled is a proposed fiber that's that connects from pole to pole, and it intersects with that band of what do you call it, conduit?
That's a conduit.
Yeah, it intersects with that.
But
Does that help answer that question or no?
no, I'm sorry, I still don't understand where it's tied into this pole. At what point does it cross to the next pole?
That
it's
bars
coming at
it
you.
going across to the next
That's
pole.
only 23 feet above the
Yes.
grade. Is that acceptable?
That's required by it's actually required by the California Public Utilities Commission General
So that's
Order
the minimum
95. That's the
Maximum height?
communications zone. There's a zone of approximately, I believe, 10 feet that's established for communications.
Oh,
What's the upper end of it? The upper elevation?
Of the communication zone, in this case, let's see here. I see that the power, there's a proposed secondary line in the power zone, and we're required to stay at least 4 feet away from that. We are staying 4 feet away, as you could see called out. Let me show you what I'm looking at. So this is the secondary line. This is power to power secondary line, and then you can see we've called out the 4-foot minimum. And then the beginning of the communication zone is really with the proposed antenna. From the perspective of the California Public Utilities Commission, the communications includes the antenna, it's fiber, it's all communication.
I guess what my concern is the boxes lower down as low as 7 feet. That is really some visual clutter, and one of them is on a very narrow sidewalk in one of our pedestrian priority zones. And I would like, if things could be raised so they're not in your sight line when you're walking down the street, that would be way preferable to me.
To be clear, there is a meter socket that is the lowest piece of equipment.
Right.
This is a PG&E meter,
right.
And it's located between 7 and 8 feet. PG&E is very specific as to where they require that meter to be, and unfortunately, we cannot place a PG&E meter, outside of that particular area.
What about the radio? Remote radio boxes, which are bigger. Can they be higher?
Can the RRUs be higher? Yeah, they can, actually. I think that at 10 feet, I think that that's an appropriate height. I would argue that the higher you go with those types of facilities, the more visually impactful it would be, but that is something that we could change. We could increase the height of the remote radio unit to a certain extent. I don't know how much off the top of my head, but what do you think would be an appropriate height for the remote radio unit?
Way up.
How high?
15 feet?
So we have currently it's proposed basically the bottom of the remote radio unit is at 10 feet 4 inches. As you could see, we've got the fiber optic cable by comparison up at 23. Where would you think that an appropriate location would be for the remote radio unit? Maybe at 15 feet? That would be about 5 feet higher.
Well, I think it would depend on the particular installation, because some of them are rather close to windows of either offices or residential places, and the one that I'm most concerned about is the one on the corner of Hollis and 65th, because it's still within our pedestrian priority zone. It's in a really, really narrow sidewalk. It's next to a building that is kind of a distinctive building, and these poles are so incredibly ugly to begin with. Just adding more stuff onto it is
well, Wareham
I'm
at
having
one
a
point was going to
hard time.
underground, had proposed to underground along Hollis Street, and they owned slightly less than 50% of the property, and they were willing to pay, but Ken Bukowski got the people organized who owned the other 51%, and they killed the deal.
Well, I'm just trying to see whether there's something that we can work with that would make that one less objectionable.
And I'm sorry, for clarification's sake.
It's 17A.
Okay. So let's take a look at 17A. Do you mind if I pull that one out?
And it would also be nice to have the photo sims. You've got several of each location. One from the sidewalk would have been really helpful, too, from the perspective of somebody walking down the sidewalk.
We have provided 3 different perspectives of each of these photo sims from as many different perspectives as possible. And all of these are taken from a person at ground level. So I believe these all are from a sidewalk perspective. But let's take a look.
That's 17.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Maybe I'm going to take out the photo sim so we can, maybe that's more helpful. So 17 is an example where we're proposing 4 remote radio units, 2 at one elevation and 2 at a second elevation a little bit higher. Let's take a look at the photographic simulations.
And can I interrupt you there real quick? Why is there a need at some locations for 4 of the remote radio units versus 2?
That's a great question. And Greg, do you want to? I've brought along our radio frequency engineer, Mr. Greg Seff, and maybe he can answer that a little bit better than I can.
Sure. Hi, I'm Greg Seff. So in some locations we have the 4 antennas because of we don't have poles nearby to those locations. So we needed extra capacity at those particular locations. So it's basically because of lack of density of nodes in those areas. So if you look at 17, it needs to fill in both to the east and to the north. And node 21 needs to cover that entire street.
And these antennas are also taller, right?
Correct. And 2 reasons for that, again. One is to provide extra coverage, and also the longer the antenna, the more you can contain the signal and keep it away from the areas you don't want to serve in.
And also, for the 2 nodes, we refer to them as nodes 12 and node 17. Those are the ones with the 4-foot-long antennas. There are 2 4-foot-long antennas. As further justification for those, we originally conceived of 2 sites for those, but by establishing 1 site instead with slightly longer antennas, 2 more RRUs, we're able to eliminate the need for duplicative sites.
Your photos that you show existing and proposed leave out the fiber optic cable.
Are we talking about for the site located at 6450 Hollis?
Well, it's any one of them. It's these pictures. They don't show the fiber optic cable in the proposed drawings.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. The fiber optic cable really is not a part of this land use application. The fiber optic cable, we were going to submit encroachment permit applications separately. Those, as AT&T installs landlines or anyone else with their CPCN, just like Extenet has, they don't go before a land use hearing for the installation of the fiber optic cable.
So you can use this facility without the fiber optic cable? Is that it?
No, we cannot. But the fiber optic cable, we've established the necessary encroachment agreement with the city. We were intending to submit encroachment permit applications that would not be subject to planning review. We simulated the facilities because those were the scope of our application, this particular application that's before you. That's the reason why the fiber optic cables were not simulated.
So yeah, so I think, sorry, Gail, I think we kind of hijacked your question.
No, go
so
ahead.
I think we were back at answering your question, right?
So in this case, we would be happy. It might be more difficult to increase the height very much, especially considering that we're already very close to to the communications lines. There are communications lines already on this pole that are being slightly relocated by about, a foot to facilitate our installation. We would be happy to accept a condition of approval requiring us to increase the height of the remote radio units as much as possible, or as much as allowed by General Order 95.
Regarding possible future undergrounding, I did read through the condition that Sarah pointed us to, but I wanted to ask also if that agreement were to be more, or that condition were to be a little bit more descriptive, would you have any issue sort of agreeing to not, not oppose any future efforts to underground utilities in any of these locations?
It's difficult to agree to something that we don't know about. I mean, it sounds like it's been our experience that undergrounding is can be very complicated. It might involve, as was explained, I believe, by Mr. Bryant, the proposals of new poles for PG&E, et cetera, et cetera. We don't know what would be involved, and I think it would be natural for us to, obviously, to take a position either for or against a particular proposal. I think maybe more appropriate language would be that we agree to cooperate with any undergrounding plans.
Charlie, when was the lines on Hollis Street north of Powell undergrounded? And you
South of Powell?
North of Powell.
You mean just the first block?
Is there only one block that's underground?
Right. The first block north of Powell was undergrounded with the Emery Station Greenway building a few years ago, and also the block between Ocean and 65th was undergrounded with the Glass House project. So that's a situation where you would require it, where it's an entire block face that you're talking about.
But they have I thought they had a transmission tower at that corner of 65th and Hollis.
No, these applicants do not have one at that corner.
Oh.
They have it at Ocean and Hollis.
Ocean and Hollis.
And 66th, I believe.
Oh, okay.
And to clarify, what we're proposing, actually, we're not proposing towers. A tower is really the infrastructure on which you would place a large telecommunications facility. What we're proposing are small nodes or small cells that we're co-locating on existing poles. What we're avoiding is the need for any more towers. In fact, there was an article in The Economist this month that was very interesting. It was a one-page short read that deals with these facilities, and it talks about the future of this technology and the moving toward these small cells. And the conclusion is that the small cells are much better than towers and much more favorable for cities because they're a lot less intrusive. They don't require new infrastructure, new towers, et cetera, et cetera.
Any other questions for the applicant? All right, thanks.
Thank you.
All right, so with that, we'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Anyone who would like to speak on this item, please come forward. Also, you can use the handheld mic or you can use the podium mic, whichever you prefer.
think maybe they gave him the handheld because the podium wasn't working.
Oh, is that right? Is the what? I didn't hear.
What?
Mic not working?
Yes. It's working.
It's working? Yeah, it's
okay.
working.
Somebody came and gave him the mic.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is George Martin of George Martin Company on 67th Street. We occupy a number of buildings along that street, in particular 1255 67th Street, where one of these nodes is going to go. I'm speaking to you tonight concerning the Extenet node antenna at 1255 67th Street, which is one of our buildings. And I might add, just as an aside, we exclusively in our business use Verizon, and in all of our buildings, the signal is great. I can't understand why they need more signal, but in our we have 5 buildings along 67th and Folger Street. We don't have any problem with signal, so this seems kind of goofy. But there are 2 issues I have with this proposal. The first is that, as I understand, the pole illustrated in the documents will be removed shortly as a result of the undergrounding right now that is going on with the communication cables in front of our building. So where they're planning on putting a node, that pole will go away. The next logical pole is directly west and is located directly outside our second floor office windows, about 15 to 20 feet directly at eye level. And although his letter says it's not at eye level, yeah, from the ground it doesn't look eye level. You go into the offices and you're looking right at the power lines and the communication lines, and it does show. It's quite obvious there. The offices are occupied by our sales and service staff 8 to 12 hours a day. And as you can imagine, our staff, when they saw the notices, is very concerned that a communication antenna will be placed directly outside their windows, a dozen or so feet away. While the representatives of Extenet say this unit has very low output strength as compared to higher output antenna, it certainly is not your home wireless unit. I'd ask you all that if you would be comfortable with such a communication antenna on your doorstep by your living quarters where you spend so much time. There are other poles in locations not so directly in proximity with offices, and I would ask this commission to simply ask Extenet to move this antenna. Thank you.
Any other speakers? All right, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. I do want to ask the staff to address any. Can you give us the background on any undergrounding efforts in that area?
There is, we have an MOU with the owners of the Marchant building, which is that big building that fronts San Pablo Avenue between 67th and Folger Streets. It's partially in Oakland, partially in Berkeley, and a little tiny piece in Emeryville. And they will be undergrounding the overhead lines along the Greenway between 67th and Folger Streets. And I believe there are a couple of poles on 67th Street that are coming down as a result of that. I don't think this is one of those poles. As far as any other undergrounding proposals along 67th Street, I'm not aware of any.
And what about, I think someone else mentioned this, and I seem to remember this too, that there was like an effort to set up an assessment district or something.
Correct. That was, I don't remember the details, but as Commissioner Cardoza said, that was a number of years ago. It basically got dropped when the property owners in the area raised objections, and it appeared to be clear that there wouldn't be enough votes to approve it. I don't think the idea has gone away. I think it could happen in the future. It's not the highest thing on our priority list right now.
Okay, thanks. And I also have a question for the applicant that I forgot to ask. What I know you've said you look. I mean, and I know that you do look at these sites on an individual basis as you're citing them for things like, what are the adjacent buildings? Are there windows there, and they're very site specific. But to what degree do you have flexibility to move, to relocate these, any one of these sites, sort of one pole in either direction?
It depends on the situation. It depends on the locale. It depends on the alternative poles. So let's talk about this area in particular. I believe, so we're talking about Hollis and Ocean, node 17, I believe. Is that correct?
Well, the speaker was talking about node 9, I think.
Yeah, 15004.
Oh, forgive me. Thank you very much. 1 second while I gather that information.
Node 9.
So this is our proposal, what we refer to as Node 9 at about 1255 67th Street. We're proposing 1 antenna and 2 RRUs on this pole. The antenna is pointed approximately southeast over the building toward the greenway, shooting into the open space.
It doesn't seem to be in front of a window.
There are a number of poles in the area. We evaluated all of them. There is, let's see here. There are 2 poles, as you can see here, located across Green Street. Unfortunately, those 2 poles, not only are they overloaded and we are prevented from installing on either of these poles because of GO 95, but even if they were not overloaded, they're very close to residential windows, whereas these antennas are above the building, not in front of the office windows. These would impose much more of a visual impact, even if we could use those poles, which we cannot.
I would also note, excuse me, that those 2 poles in the distance are among the poles that are slated to be removed as part of the undergrounding related to the Marchant building.
Okay.
It might also be helpful if you could explain the difference between the RR units and the antennas, whether something is going out from one or coming in from one, or what's going on, because there's some concern expressed about the boxes that are lower down, and if you could explain what they are actually doing, that would be helpful.
Yes, so there are 2 RRUs. Those are the remote radio units. They're fully encased and they have no emissions. There's no emitting of the signal out from the RRU. The signal is transmitted from the RRU up the 3-inch conduit, in which there's a coaxial cable, up to the single antenna, which does transmit, in this case, over the building.
So I asked the question because I'm most concerned about the 2 nodes that are on Hollis Street.
He's got, I think he wants to clarify something.
Hold on. So
Information here.
okay.
Information.
We've closed the public hearing. We may reopen it, and if you hold on, we may reopen it to give you more time.
I would be agreeable to reopening the public hearing as well. I just want to mention that.
What's that?
I'm agreeable to reopening the public hearing if.
Okay.
What was your question, Chair Moss?
So the 2, I was actually most concerned about the 2 sites that are on Hollis Street, and it seemed to me as I was looking at them that there may be opportunity to move the site, up the block by 1 pole, which I remember specifically in one location would have put it closer to a tree, although not in the tree, and just closer to an area that had a lot more visual interest to kind of disguise it.
Let's talk about those. First, I know that node 7 is over on Hollis Street, and I'm gathering my things.
003 and 007.
Correct. Yeah, this is 003. So let's start with this one. To my knowledge, we have not had any opposition to this proposal. Is that correct, Ms. Dillon? So no opposition. Oh, that's 17 again. Forgive me. Trying to find a decent map here.
007 it is.
So this is our proposal here at the southeast corner of 67th and Hollis.
Right.
And this is the proposal. It's one antenna, 2 RRUs, as you can see here.
There's a photo sim from on 67th Street that I think, yeah, that's the one. So, for example, I was wondering, could it be moved across the street to the pole on the other side of, or any of those poles on the other side of Hollis, or around the corner onto 67th?
So your question first, we're looking west. This is west, down 67th. This is Hollis.
Mm-hmm.
This area is north. This area is south.
Mm-hmm.
So this is our proposed facility on the corner. The pole immediately east is this pole. Is that the pole that you would prefer this facility to go on?
Yeah.
The reason we didn't choose this pole is because it's right at the building entrance of Berkeley Communications. We were trying to avoid going any further east because we have other facilities in that direction. This is a possible viable alternative. So we could possibly move it if the Planning Commission would prefer, to be honest. We would have to confirm, the radio frequency engineering and confirm the Geo95 engineering. But again, the reason that we selected the pole that we did was because this pole is right at the entrance of Berkeley Communications, whereas the pole we selected is more on the corner.
You wanted to get away from.
And here's another.
Yeah, I was trying to. The corner poles in particular seemed very visible to me.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my concern. And then, so can we take a look also at the one on 65th and Hollis?
Sure. And really fast, looking north, this is the pole in question, and this is our proposed pole. So again, we would have to double check the radio frequency and the engineering, but upon initial review, it looks like that is a feasible alternative. Let's go to the next one. So we're going to Site 17 at Ocean and Hollis, is that correct? The one that
Yes.
Mr. Martin, I believe, was talking about?
No, he's talking about 67th Street, but you're
Oh, that's right.
talking
I'm
about
sorry.
Hollis Street.
Number 9.
Yeah, so I don't have the map with all the notes.
I do.
Number 17A,
So here's.
which is...
So this is Site 17 on the south.
Yeah, that's the one.
East corner of Ocean and Hollis.
Mm-hmm.
So 1 second while I gather my items to discuss this one. So this is a view looking southeast at the southeast corner. As you can see, we're proposing 2 antennas, one pointed approximately north and the other pointed approximately east. Both would be away from this building here. And then we're proposing 4 RRUs, remote radio units, stacked. And then there's the PG&E meter at the bottom there. In this case, we looked at a number of alternatives in the area. This view does a pretty good job of showing those alternatives.
Oh, good.
So this is taken just south of the intersection, looking north, and you could see beyond there are 2 poles just north of our proposal here and here. We originally wanted our facility to go at either of those 2 poles. There's an elementary school immediately there at those 2 poles. Proposals like these don't go over very well adjacent to elementary schools. Also, these 2 poles are both overloaded, so we can't physically place facilities at either of those 2 poles.
And what about the pole that's across the street? I mean, you can see it more on the site plan on A1.
Yeah.
It's sort of
this is a pretty good view of
diagonal,
that pole. Yeah, I know.
Across from there.
So we evaluated this pole too. So this view is taken directly east of the site, looking west toward the bay, and this is the pole, I believe, Commissioner Tan, that you're identifying.
That's the one that I'm seeing on the site plan.
We did look at that pole as well. Unfortunately, I'm going to go back to the map here. From an engineering perspective, from a GEO 95 perspective, we could, it appears, place a facility at this pole. But the reason we excluded it is because, and I believe I might have a better perspective. If you look right here, there's a large second or third story that would partially block the signal. If we were so close to that, it would obstruct the signal. And I think that that second story is depicted. You can just see it. It's hard to see, but this right here is an approximate second story. It's set back a little bit from the edge of the building, so you can't readily see it from the other photographic simulation. But it doesn't present an ideal radio frequency propagation. We still might be able to utilize that pole if this commission would prefer it to be used. However, it might necessitate the installation of a second site in the area. The reason this pole is so great, even our original design to go up near the elementary school on one of those 2 poles in the background was also a bad proposal, is because we were going to have to place another facility, a second facility further south. But by using this pole, we can have 2 antennas at the same location, adequately propagate their signal without the need for a duplicative location.
And what about if you go further east on Ocean Avenue, right across from, or adjacent to the parking, the existing parking, there's a pole there as well on the site plan.
Yeah, further east, let's see here.
It's in front of a parking lot, it looks like.
We have another facility that's over in that direction. I'm trying to find if I have a good depiction of that pole. Maybe this is the best. Forgive me, it's hard to... If I'm not mistaken, and I don't think we have a depiction of this pole, but I believe that it was overloaded further east, and also
And it's across from where you were pointing your pencil, actually, so.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, see,
I
there's
see
an
it.
existing parking lot, I'm assuming. Where it says-
further
Yeah,
east
right about
across the
there,
street.
right about there.
Let's see if we have a photo sim of that. I think that's the pole that's right here, and I believe that pole has a riser on it, preventing an adequate climbing zone for pursuant to GO 95. When there's a power riser on the pole, then it prevents us from installing there in most cases.
Anything else for the applicant while we've got him up here? Okay, thanks. Then, unless there are any objections, I think I'll reopen the public hearing briefly. Okay, all right, we'll go ahead and reopen the public hearing.
If you could pull up, oh, here it is right here. And I apologize for my outbursts. When I see misinformation from people that really haven't studied the area, I live there 14 hours a day. I know what goes on in my neighborhood and what goes on in front of my building. I guess I do need a microphone.
There you go.
If you look at this photograph here, you see this is the pole in question where they're talking about putting the antenna. They have trenched in front of our building from this point here all the way to where about here, right in front of our offices, where there's another telephone pole, or whatever you want to call that. This communication cables right here will be going underground to that point. So therefore, there's no need for this pole to be here. This electrical line here will be terminated at the pole here. And then this pole will go away. This one wire that goes along here is simply a support wire. These electrical wires go nowhere. They will be terminated back at this pole located here. So, in fact, this pole will go away. We've been told by the contractor, and if you recall, Charlie, I communicated with you and Maurice today about the vault that is located right here where they tore up our sidewalk, and that's part of this undergrounding that went on here. So, I mean, and I'd be happy to have you folks come out and look at the results of the trenching that went on in front of our building. So, I mean, it's a fact the communication is being underground, which makes this pole go away, which makes the pole right here directly in front of our offices. So, I mean...
So where are the overhead electrical and telephone wires on this street?
Here is the communication cables.
Right.
Okay, and these are the ones that are going to be underground to this pole right here. That would be located approximately.
You mean, are they fiber optic cable?
Everything. All these wires here are going to go away. The electrical wires that are up high, the high tension, from this pole they don't go anywhere.
No, but my question is, there must be electric wires somewhere on the 67th Street.
Oh, there are. And
If they're not on this block, then where are they?
I misunderstand. There is electrical cable back here. I mean, if you just go back further, this is where they are.
When an area is undergrounded, when it's completely undergrounded, all of the overhead utilities go in what's called a joint trench. And you have telephone and electrical and fiber optic and all these other things, AT&T, PG&E, they all go into this joint trench. I'm not aware of any joint trench project on this street. I do know that Paxio is putting in underground fiber optic cable all over the place.
I think that's part of it, because between this pole here and this location here, there is no electrical.
Well, where does your electricity come from?
Comes from up here, from a location further west.
Okay, I'm having a difficult time understanding this, because there have to be electrical drops to the various buildings.
Is there an overhead view of that street? Yes. Then I can probably better show that.
Well, I can discuss this with the Public Works Director, but I'm not aware of any undergrounding district
can you
on this block. I am aware of Paxio undergrounding their fiber optic cables.
This is the proposed pole.
Okay.
And this is the...
this is the greenway. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, and are there other where are the other poles located here?
They're hard to tell.
Yeah, that's what it's.
Pole called out here.
Or just like across the street.
Okay.
Doesn't go anywhere.
We're happy, we will agree to cooperate with any undergrounding efforts.
But anyway, I'm just pointing out that it is going to be undergrounded.
Even if it's being undergrounded this year, we will still install the site for however short amount of time. It's a very quick installation.
Fine. Okay.
You need to-
I mean, I made my point. So, and you guys have the facts.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I'll discuss this with the Public Works Director and see what he knows about this, but I haven't heard of any undergrounding district on this block. I've heard of Paxio putting their cable underground. But as far as electrical and telephone, I'm not aware that that's also being undergrounded.
We have agreed to obtain encroachment permits for these facilities, and again, we'd be happy to add language that we will cooperate with, affirmatively cooperate with any undergrounding. I think that's more appropriate language. It might even be better for the city. There was one other small point that I wanted to mention in response to Mr. Martin's question regarding his experience with service coverage in the area. There are anecdotal experiences of service. The service that we're proposing here is, and the standard that the FCC holds these facilities to, is in-building service. In-building service is the same type of service that you would expect from your landline. People often see that they might have a number of bars on their phone, but as a result of constant data use, maybe peak hours, perhaps everyone's driving home from work or from school during rush hour, that might impose additional demand on the network. And even though you might see that you have 3 bars, you have adequate coverage in a place in time, you might experience dropped calls as a result of the capacity demand, the lack of capacity in the area, or interference from the bay as a result of this particular high demand locale. Thank you.
Great, thanks. All right, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing, and we'll bring this back for deliberation.
So could we just look at that node again? There was the following picture by Mr. Martin's property, the following photo sim. So that's...
One more.
Yeah, no, I'm just looking, if the equipment, if that pole were to go away and that equipment were to go away, where would your next place be?
That's a big if. We don't like to get into ifs because as a result of undergrounding, sometimes maybe a new pole would be placed across the street.
Right, no, I think that my question had to do with whether the next pole that was in front of their offices would be the place where it would go. Looks like that pole is a pretty loaded pole.
Yeah, the ones across the Greenway, my understanding is they're going away. They were also extremely overloaded. We also looked...
The view before that, I think, showed.
Yes.
Okay, so that's looking east. So that pole where you're pointing to is the next pole.
Exactly, and it's extremely overloaded, as you can see.
So it's not likely that the equipment would go there.
No.
Well, on the site
one
plan,
across the street as
yeah,
well.
On the site plan, yeah, the one you just pointed to across the street. Okay, that one
Also
looks pretty overloaded. And then there's another one. Maybe that's the same one. I'm looking at the site plan, so heading west, I guess.
Yeah, the 2 poles west are overloaded with transformers, and any further west
There's one
really
other,
is,
yeah.
into our other, I think we've got another node that way. The pole across the street is overloaded as well. The 2 poles across Green, I mentioned those, overloaded, and it sounds like going away more imminently. And that's about it for this area. This is the aerial again. Kind of tough to see.
Mm-hmm.
Well, does anyone want to start the discussion?
I'd move approval.
What? You're gonna move approval? I'm.
Motion? Here a second. Yeah.
I'm curious if there's support for my. I was just trying to kind of. All of them. I would have loved to have gotten both of these sites on Hollis a little bit less conspicuous. I think that's a pretty heavily traveled, kind of both bike and pedestrian corridor.
The pedestrian priority. I mean, I would support exploring more options along those corridors.
But it's already so overloaded with transformers and power lines and telephone lines.
Right. Well, we heard that the one on 67th could potentially be relocated around the corner, which I think would have some benefit. It was, it would be more disguised by a tree in that location, I think.
I mean, this is so trivial compared to all the other stuff that's on these poles. I mean, the one when you look down Hollis, you can see another pole that has a whole, looks like a candelabra of little transmitters. These are less obtrusive than the others, but I don't know.
Well, I would, at the very least, I would like to see language about the RRU boxes being raised as high as they possibly can, because I think that they're big contributors to visual clutter. If they're up closer to a window level, they're not emitting anything, and the antennas, from what one of these other letters that we got, a comment letter, it seems like the antennas transmit horizontally, so if it's over your roof, it's not going to be transmitting down into your house or whatever, or wherever you're located. So I'd like to at least see that the boxes be raised.
Okay. Basically, it's the meter box that is the lowest thing there.
And that can't.
The meter
box
can't
is
move, but the meter is not
That's
that.
smaller, yeah.
The meter's smaller, yeah.
It's still ugly.
Yeah. I
Maybe over
have
time
to
we'll
say,
get some technology.
now that I know that DAS nodes exist, I see them everywhere. But before I knew that they existed, there are no fewer than 4 of them that are exactly on my bike commute home, and I never noticed any of them until they were pointed out to me.
That's in El Cerrito or Albany? Or what?
There's a series of them in Berkeley, yeah, along the California Bike Boulevard.
I mean, it's a shame to see more clutter when I think all of our goal is to see as much of this go away as possible. And especially some of the longer ones, or the taller antenna, and just thinking about that project on 65th, and of course we have no idea what's going to happen with that, but there was so much emphasis on the facade of that building and the balconies looking out, and now I'm just like imagining what they're going to be looking out at is this, 5 foot tall or 4 foot tall antenna hanging out 4 feet from this pole right in front of them. But
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I will add also, I tend to support this sort of deployment as an alternative to more macro antennas, which I do think tend to have more of a visual clutter. I mean, just drive by the water tower on Powell Street, right? There's no fewer than a dozen of them.
Yeah.
Well, there seems to be a continual shortage of transmission. AT&T's service was miserable for a long time, but it's gotten a little better now.
Can I ask staff, if we were to desire for the applicant to reevaluate any of the locations of these sites, how would you recommend that we go forward?
Well, I guess there's two options. You could either approve it. There are 5 resolutions before you, 5 sets of conditions. So any of the ones that you wanted them to reevaluate, you could approve with a condition that they be reevaluated for approval by staff subsequently, or you could just continue that one to a future meeting and have it come back when they've evaluated a different location.
So it's the Hollis Street ones you'd want to hold, is that?
No, I think what Charlie just said is that we could approve it in a, with the understanding that they.
If you want to entrust us to, approve the other location.
Which I'm happy to do. So.
Do we have to define which those are that we want Charlie to look into then? Of the 5, it was 2 of them.
Yes, yeah. So are there any other comments before I? All right, I'm gonna.
Well, I think, I think the 2 on Hollis and the one in front of the Martin Building on 67th Street is a concern too, and if there's a better location that should be looked at. But I would also like to add some kind of language about it being looked at so that it's that the height on the pole is as least obtrusive as possible. If raising it up puts it in front of somebody's window, then it's better to keep it,
keep it where it was.
If you can work with staff to get a height that is as high and out of people's sight lines as possible, that's what I would like to see.
Can we also would you be amenable on the radio units to giving some degree of flexibility? I think I would want those to be looked at on a case-by-case basis too, and not.
That's what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah.
The antennas are above building heights.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway, so it's those boxes that are sitting in.
Yeah, that's
10
the
feet
thing
up.
Staff couldn't work on.
Okay, then I'm going to take a stab at making a motion.
I believe Commissioner Cardozo already made a motion.
Make a counter motion.
But I didn't hear a second for it. Is there
I guess
I
it
didn't
failed
hear
for
a second
lack of
either.
a second.
Right.
All right.
So I'm going to move approval of these 5 applications with the added condition of approval that the radio units be moved as high as possible. That staff review the location for the radio units with the understanding that they be moved as high as possible on the pole to a feasible location. So.
To be as visually unobtrusive
Yeah,
as
to
possible.
be as that's what yes, thank you. To be as visually unobtrusive as possible, and that staff work with the applicant to explore alternative poles for the site at 6655 Hollis and the site at 1255 67th and the site at not that one. What's the other one? 6450 Hollis. And then also to clarify the condition of approval about undergrounding, that the applicant will cooperate with future efforts to underground utilities.
I second.
Just let me get which nodes those were again. It was, I heard 1255 67th, 6450 Hollis, and what was the other one?
6655 Hollis.
6655 Hollis?
It's node
Yeah,
7.
node 7.
It's node 7.
Oh,
It says 1321 67th Street on the agenda.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. On the plans it
Oh,
says
yeah.
6655
Okay.
Hollis.
It says across from 6655.
Whatever.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Node
just to be
7,
clear, it's nodes
17,
7, 9, and 17A.
7,
Correct.
9, and 17A is correct.
All right.
That, well, maybe staff can help me out here, but that,
That the applicant
Yeah.
works with staff to explore alternative poles for nodes 7, 9, and 17A,
yes.
right?
And that we work with them to find a least visually obtrusive
That-
location for the radio boxes.
Right, that's
Yeah.
a different condition. But I was
Oh,
just
okay.
saying what that condition said. Okay, I have 3 conditions. That staff will review the radio unit boxes, and they shall be moved as high as possible to be as visually unintrusive as possible. That staff will work with the applicant to explore alternative poles for nodes 7, 9, and 17A, and that the applicant will agree to cooperate with any future undergrounding efforts. Is that right?
Yep.
All right. Are you ready to vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Cardoza?
Aye.
Commissioner Donaldson?
Aye.
Commissioner Gunkel?
Aye.
Vice Chair Tan?
Aye.
Chair Moss?
Aye.
5 ayes, the application is approved. This decision may be appealed to the City Council within 15 days.
Thank you.
All right.